friend Hogar Panjar and I had just returned from spending 2 days in a village. We're where we were staying, in a house which was known to be the abode of terrible ghosts. That house, like my two houses, was built of chestnut timber. It had long, dark corridors and high-ceiling rooms. This house, it was far away from the population and surrounded by a small forest of pine trees, in which every evening, breeze rustled and whispered in the darkness. Every day, as long as we lived in this house, the southwest wind brought heavy rain with it. In the pouring rain, strange sounds are heard from the Chinese side, and the wind blows with them, and the trees, the rushing air between them, felt like restless spirits. The thick drops of rain hitting the windows and doors started playing a strange demonic jingling. But in spite of this environment, which in itself was quite demonic, I may say that my own religious condition was especially sufficient to completely overwhelm these sights and sounds. It was Ani. I confess that during the whole time we were there, I lay awake both nights in great anxiety, panic, and restlessness. I am afraid of the dark, but more than that, I am afraid of an inadequate candle flickering in the darkness. On the evening after our return to the city, Hugh Granger and I dined together, and after dinner our conversation, as usual, soon returned to topics of interest. "But why you go in search of ghosts, I do not understand," he asked. "Because your teeth are chattering with fear, and your eyes are wide with fear. As long as we were there, you remained in fear." Smiling. "Or do you like to be scared?" he said again while leaving. Hugh, though intelligent, sometimes speaks mean words. "Why not? Of course I like to be scared," I replied. "Fear is the most addictive emotion. When one is afraid, everything else is forgotten." Well, the truth is that neither of us saw anything then, but I always did. "What do you believe?" he said. "And who have you always believed in?" I asked, looking at him with deep eyes. He looked at me and then said, "That demons, etc., are purely objective, not subjective, and that one's state of mind has nothing to do with the perception that one perceives them, nor does the situation or environment have anything to do with them. The house we live in now has had the reputation of being a ghost house for years, and it definitely has all the essentials." Hugh got up and lit a cigarette. It is about 6 feet tall and as wide as it is long. He started saying again while lighting a cigarette, "You can understand that even my visit to this house was not beneficial because I was the wrong person in the wrong place, although my nerves are quite stable." He sat back in his chair. He thought for a while and then spoke again. "I think I can talk about that now. I can't believe what I saw and I don't want to." I looked at Hugh in surprise. I was trying to fully understand what he wanted to say. He started saying again, "First, I want to tell you my theory about seeing ghosts, and I can explain it best with an example. Imagine that you or I are peering through a small hole in a sheet of cardboard that is constantly rotating. Behind the sheet of cardboard was one, and the sheet is also in constant but free motion. This sheet also has a hole. When the two rotating holes luckily meet each other, we see another world beyond them. This is the spiritual world. The sights and sounds of this spiritual world become inaudible to us mortals. For most people, these two holes, they never come face to face during life, but at the time of death, they come face to face and then remain still." He paused for a while and then said, "But my case is different. My mind is not like that, and I was sure that for me, even these holes will not come against each other, and I will not have to see this spiritual world, or ghosts. But what happened surprised me." I was sitting silently listening to him. Although I had heard of the theory he was expounding before, Hugh presented it in a very effective and beautiful way, but I was not very sure about it. So I replied, "I hope that this theory of yours is not only verbal, but that you have also experienced it. You can decide that only after hearing the whole thing." He said, smiling. He then got up, and after adding more wood to the fireplace, Creed started the fire. There is no doubt that Hugh has a knack for storytelling, which is essential for a storyteller. In fact, I had advised him several times to take it up as a profession. If financial conditions were ever bad, he could earn good money by telling stories to people. I know most people don't like to listen or read long stories, but maybe a few people, myself included, really like to listen to long stories. Hugh is an exemplary narrator. I don't like his ideas or I don't care for analogies, but when it comes to facts, whatever, I like his style. Let's begin now and tell me the whole story, but remember that brevity makes the story funny. I want to hear when, where, and how did it happen. Holmes smiled and looked at me and then said, "This is June 24th, exactly 18 months ago today. You will remember, I came from the village to stay with you for a week. We had eaten together at this same place. Have you seen a ghost here?" I asked, jumping in surprise. "In this little house?" "We only had food here in this house," he said, "and after dinner I went out for a walk and you stayed at home. You may remember that your servant was not present at dinner, and when I asked where he was, so you told me he was sick." I looked at him in surprise and again wondered what he wanted to say. He started again. "When I went out, you gave me the key to the outer door so that I would not have any trouble on my return. When I came back, I saw that you had gone to bed to sleep. I couldn't sleep, so I started looking at that day's post. I had received many business letters which needed to be answered, so I sat in the hall and wrote their answers and sealed them in an envelope. It took me a long time there, and by the time I went upstairs to my room to sleep, it was well past night. You put me on the third floor, facing the street. The room was given for living, which I assume you would normally use for yourself. It was a very hot night, and when I went out for a walk, the moon was shining brightly in the sky, but when I returned, the whole sky was covered with clouds, and it looked like it would start raining soon. Will be done. My eyes were heavy with sleep. After lying on the bed, I noticed that one of the windows in the room was left open, but I was finding it very difficult to get up from the bed to close it. Although I was feeling uneasy, but after a while I caught my eye. I don't know what was on the clock when I opened my eyes, but it was certain that it was not yet morning. I don't remember that I have slept like this at night and woke up restless for the first time. This was the opportunity. At that time, there was neither the sound of anyone walking in the street nor the rattling of the wheels of a car. I felt that I must have slept for an hour or two at most, as it was not dawn yet. It was difficult for me to get out of bed and close the window before going to bed, but now I find it easy. I got up and went to the window, and before closing it, I opened her stomach completely and started breathing in the fresh air. After taking a deep breath for a while, I felt the urge to look out into the street, and I leaned on the ledge. The fresh air calmed my nerves. The past day was quite pleasant, and I was looking forward to another pleasant day tomorrow. But at this time, in the silence before dawn, I felt terribly alone. Just when I was about to close the window and go back to bed, I saw a car in the street, heard the sound of coming. It was a horse carriage, as I could clearly recognize the sound of the horses galloping. The car was not visible yet, but it was clear that it was coming in that direction. I don't know why I wanted to see where this car was coming from and where it was going at this time of night. Shortly after the car appeared, I saw that the horses in the carriage were black in color and had tails. Surprisingly, the carriage they were riding was made of glass, but its frame was black. This car was completely empty. This car was coming in the same street, and I was shocked when this empty car stopped at the door of your house. At once the thought arose in my mind that you had told me at dinner that your servant was sick, and I thought that perhaps he had become very ill, or perhaps died. I thought maybe you from me. They do not want to talk about it, so they are sending his body out of the house at night. But then I felt this idea of my own very foolish. I was still leaning out of the window, and I also remember that it was dark at that time. The bright moon in the sky was hidden behind the dark clouds at that time, but it was so strange that I could easily and clearly see this car in the street. I could see every detail of the carriage and the horses. The street was completely empty. Only the driver was with the car. Now I was looking at Apsy. I could see every detail of her clothes, but since I was at a height, I could not see her face. He was wearing gray pants and brown shoes. The color of the coat was black with the planets of the sister bands. On his head was a hat made of straw. A small bag was slung over his shoulder. I still remember all the details. This dress can be that of a bus conductor. I immediately spoke, listening to him. Rural, I thought too. Hughes slowly, no. And while I was thinking this, he raised his head and looked at me. His face was pale. He had a mole on his cheek on which black hair was visible. were coming, it all seemed so clear as if I was standing close to it in the sunlight watching it all. On catching sight of me, the driver touched the brim of his hat with one hand and bowed his head slightly in greeting. Then his whispering voice hit my ears. "There is room for only one passenger in the car, sir." As soon as I heard his voice, I felt a strange and scary feeling covering my entire body. I immediately stuck my head in through the window and quickly closed the window. I turned on the light in the room and looked at the time on my wristwatch and found that it was now 11:30 in the night. I couldn't understand what explained what I saw on the street below. I did not have the courage to open the door and look again. So I lied on the bed roshni by and thought we had dinner together. Then I went out for a walk. When I came back after a long time, I wrote answers to many letters and then went to bed. How can it be 11:30? Suddenly I thought that maybe my watch had stopped, but it had not because I could hear it ticking in the dark of the night. Once again there was silence. I was expecting every moment to hear footsteps on the stairs. Footsteps like someone walking with a load, but no sound was coming from inside the house. There will be the same dead silence. The driver of the car was waiting outside the door. The ticking of the clock got longer and longer, and then I saw the light in the room. I began to notice the difference and realized that the ba had begun to rise every morning. How did it happen that if that car came at night to pick up the dead body, why was it not sent? The car was still waiting at the door, and it was almost morning. At that time, I again got up from the bed and slowly walked to the window and opened it, peeked out into the street in fear. It was dawn outside. It was clearly seen that the answer was completely blank. Again, I looked at my watch. It was now 4:30, but I can swear that when I saw the car earlier, not even half an hour had passed. At that time, the clock said that it was 11:30. How did so much time pass by? At that time, while thinking all this, I was realizing that when I saw the car at night, I was in another era, and now I am in another era. It was the morning of June 25th. It was empty outside. A little while ago, a horse carriage driver spoke to me. It was 11:30 at that time. Who was that driver? And what 11:30? What time was it that I saw on my watch? I was trying to convince myself that everything I saw was a dream. But if you ask me if I believe in this idea, I will admit that I do. I did not believe in this idea. Your servant didn't even show up for breakfast the next morning. I saw him again on the subject before he left at 2:00. I think I should have discussed it with you then. You might have seen what I saw, but I thought it was all just my imagination. Although the one I saw was actually the driver his voice was real. His face was etched in my mind. Then I thought maybe it was my dream, so I didn't talk to you. Something surprisingly simple in all of this. And there was a mystery. There was no ancient demonic house here. Nor were there tall chestnut trees swaying with a strong wind. Nor was there any suitable environment to dominate my mind and show me all this in my sleep. Don't tell me it was all a dream, I said. I don't know if it was a dream or not. All I can say is that I believe I was awake myself. In any case, the rest of the story is strange. Is there still a story? I sped up. When asked, he said again. I went back to my house that afternoon, and after that, the horror of what I had seen or dreamed that night left my mind. After exactly 1 month, I came to this city again for a day. I reached here around 11:00. I wanted to meet you. It was a hot morning. I decided to take a bus to reach your home. As I exited the railway station, I headed towards the bus stand. There was a bus standing ready. I saw that it was fully loaded with passengers. As soon as I reached him, the conductor of the bus, who was inside, came out. He was wearing gray pants and brown shoes. He had a black coat on his body, which was buttoned all the way up. He had a straw hat on his head and a small bag on his shoulder. I was shocked to see her dress and quickly looked at her face. It was the same face that I saw in this street that night when I was coming out of the window. Dolhora Sharajan to the left was a murder. He saluted me, touching his hat, and then said, "There is only one passenger capacity in the bus, sir." Seeing him and listening to him, a sense of fear and panic gripped me completely. I staggered back in horror and screamed hysterically, "No, no. At that time, I felt that I was not living in the time that was passing, but in the hour that had passed a month ago, when I was leaning here from your bedroom window before dawn. The hole through which I was looking at time was right in front of the hole that opened into another world. What I saw there had a meaning of its own, some significance. The answer was complete. I was standing there and I was in love. There was a post office in front of me, and I saw the clock in the window there. To tell me this, no matter what time she was telling. As you can probably guess, every newspaper covered this news in a very prominent way. You will remember what happened at the end of July. When the bus started its journey, it collided with a dean who was coming from the opposite direction at a high speed while coming to the main road. While saving Dean, the bus hit a wall, and none of the passengers in it could survive. Saying this, Hugh looked at me with deep eyes. I couldn't say anything, just stared blankly at him. After a pause, he said, "And this is my story, E.F. Benson.